Welcome back. Joining me this morning on our panel of politicians from Melbourne, the Manager of Opposition Business in the Senate, Mitch Fifield. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Ashley.
And here with me in the Canberra studio this morning, the Labor MP, Andrew Leigh. Good morning to you
Ashley.
as well. We're going to start with you today, Andrew. We have read this morning in the Daily Telegraph that your colleague, Mike Kelly, who's the Parliamentary Secretary for Agriculture, he's voiced his concerns about the POCUA reforms that your government is pursuing. He apparently has told the Telegraph he's worried that they could kill off the clubs. He explains that in his electorate of Eden Monaro, clubs with only a few machines wouldn't be able to afford the pre-commitment technology the government wants to introduce, and he says in one town the only ATM in the whole town is actually inside a club, so he says it would make no sense to limit the amount people can withdraw from the ATM in that club to $250. Are you surprised that he's broken ranks with Labor on this one this morning?
Well, Ashley, I read the story and I actually didn't see much in that seemed to differ from the discussions that are happening within the multi-party committee around gambling reform. Mike's concerned about the impact on smaller venues of where they're the only ATM in town, and that's certainly something we're cognizant of. And he's looking at the issue of the cost of implementing mandatory pre-commitment, and that's something we're very aware of. This isn't about hurting clubs. This is about helping problem gamblers and making sure that we have a set of reforms which bring down the scourge of problem gambling, which, as we know, hurts families and gamblers themselves. And the government believes that we can do that in a pretty non-intrusive way by allowing people to set a limit as high or low as they like, and that enables people who have self-control problems to try and deal with that by setting a limit before they start to gamble.
Do you think many Labor MPs are starting to get nervous about the impact of these reforms? No doubt you're all being lobbied by the industry over this pretty heavily.
Certainly, Ashley, the people I've spoken with share my own view, which is that it's important to deal with problem gambling. It's important to address the impact problem gambling has, and it's important to do that in a way which has as little impact on the clubs as possible. Frankly, if the clubs are making no money out of problem gamblers, then these reforms shouldn't hurt them at all. If there are clubs which are living off the earnings of problems gamblers and the damage that's doing the community, then that may well have an impact.
Mitch Fifield, you no doubt want to end problem gambling among as much as the rest of us, but why is the coalition opposed? Is it more to do with the political motivations behind this? Obviously, you know that if these reforms don't go ahead, then there is that possibility, as Andrew Wilkie has threatened, that he might withdraw support from Labor and you could be back at the polls. Is that more the reason behind the coalition's opposition to these reforms?
Not at all. I mean, the coalition is concerned about problem gambling. We all are, but it's important to look to do what will actually make a difference. And we're not convinced that mandatory pre-commitment will lead to the improvement in problem gambling that the government thinks. We're all in favour of pre-commitment, voluntary pre-commitment. It's important when looking at these issues to do so carefully, calmly, on the basis of the evidence, not, as this government did, take a decision when you're simply scrambling to find the numbers to form government. But I've got to say, Ashley, if Andrew can't see any difference between what Mike Kelly is saying and what the government's position is, then I really think he needs to get reading glasses, because Mike Kelly is clearly concerned about his seat. He's worried. He's getting blowback from clubs in his electorate, from ordinary citizens of his community, not from the evil clubs lobby, as some like to portray it, but from his constituents. And we're very concerned that if you have this incredibly blunt and probably ineffective instrument of mandatory pre-commitment, you're going to be seriously damaging community clubs, their viability, their ability to put back into the community, and in some cases, as Mike Kelly has pointed out, the sole point for getting money from an ATM, if you've got a cap on the amount of money that you can withdraw. But Mike Kelly, there's something that he needs to do if he really believes what he says, and that is, if you can't support government policy and you're a member of the executive, you need to resign. And if Mike Kelly is serious, he'll step down from his position as Parliamentary Secretary.
So Mitch, what's interesting about your position here is you say you're concerned about problem gambling, but the only solution you're able to offer is something that's happening already. We already have voluntary pre-commitment. So it's difficult to see that the coalition is willing to do anything about problem gambling apart from mouth platitudes. I mean, if you're serious about it, you're willing to engage with the reform agenda.
That's a fair point, is it? Voluntary pre-commitment, it's a bit naive naive to think problem gamblers are going to pay much attention to that, isn't it?
Voluntary pre-commitment is part of the answer. We're very happy to look at the work of the Productivity Commission and very happy to look at the work of the Parliamentary Committee that's currently looking at gaming issues. And there may be some worthwhile things to come out of those two inquiries. But it's important not to simply take action to be seen to be taking action, which is so often the case with this government. You don't want to take action if it's not going to have the effect of improving the situation for problem gamblers, and you don't want to take action such as mandatory pre-commitment if you're going to build community clubs, who are a very important part of local communities, particularly in regional areas. And Mike Kelly has indicated that that's the case. That's the feedback that he's getting from his community. I'm sure many Labor MPs are getting that feedback. It's important to do the right thing. This government is simply committed to a policy of mandatory pre-commitment because that's what they had to do to secure the vote of an independent to form government. That shouldn't be the background for forming policy on these issues. It should be formed on the basis of evidence.
I'm a big supporter of community clubs. I held a community forum in one of my local clubs the other day. Many of them put a lot of resources back in the community. But the key point here
they don't see
is that
you
we
as
don't
a supporter
want
of
community
theirs,
clubs
Andrew,
which are making money off the back of problem gamblers. We need to deal with the impact
on that one. Let's move on to another newspaper report today, and that's one on the front page of the Australian today. Andrew, it quotes Peter Garrett, the Education Minister, saying that he wants to undertake root and branch reform of the school funding system. We know that a review, of course, is underway. The final report's due at the end of the year. Do you expect that under your government, the proposal that will be put forward would see private schools get less government funding?
Well, actually, certainly this is a government which is strongly committed towards investing in education. We're putting $65 billion into schools, nearly twice what the Howard government put in their last 4 years in office. And we're reviewing the private schools funding formula, which frankly contains some anomalies. Let me tell you about one of those. There's two schools in my electorate which were formed a year apart from one another. One was formed just before the Howard government changed its funding formula. The other was formed the year after. One is funding maintained, the other isn't funding maintained. They get dramatically different levels of income just because of the year in which they're founded.
So you think some private schools deserve to get less government funding than they do at the moment?
Well, the current system seems to contain anomalies in it which don't seem fair, and that's why we've asked.
Some private schools are getting too much funding.
Well, that's what we're doing here is we're asking David Gonski to look into some of these anomalies which arose when the Howard government changed the funding formula back in 2001, recognising that we need to have a system which is defensible and fair for all Australians. And of course, there's if you were to make changes, there would be transitional issues. We've promised no school will lose $1 of funding as a result of this review, but it's important to take this once-in-a-generation opportunity to look at the school funding system and the anomalies, which I think everyone agrees exist within it.
Yes, they might not lose $1, but they might not have their funds increased in coming years as that.
Well, these are things we're asking David Gonski to look into.
Mitch Fifield, Howard government review also said that the system was inequitable. It says that the consistency and equity of the funding arrangements that are in place at the moment just aren't fair. Do you believe that we do need this root and branch reform that Peter Garrett's talking about?
Well, we'll take a look at the work of David Gonski, but the Coalition supports the SES funding model. We don't want to see schools disadvantaged. We don't want to see a return to the Latham Schools hit list. This government can't guarantee that schools won't be worse off, that schools won't be receiving less funding as a result of their response to the Gonski review. Labor try from time to time to pretend that they actually do like funding of private schools, but if you scratch below the surface, there's a very deep hostility in the Labor Party to the funding of private schools. And Andy, I think, indicated in his own electorate, he's got a little hit list of his own in mind in contrasting those two schools. Labor always want to return to a schools hit list, but for Labor, it always comes back to funding issues. But we think that there's more to do in education than look at funding. We also want to look at the structure in education, giving school principals greater autonomy over their staffing, over their budgets. We think that will help lead to better education outcomes. We also think that the $16 billion which was wasted on school halls could have been better invested. Andy cited that they doubled education funding compared to the Howard government. Well, he's also counting that $16 billion of waste in providing school halls. So look, we're happy to look at the work of David.
I should take you to some of the school building projects in my electorate, to the projects which allow teachers to team teach in Amaru's school, to the projects which allow disabled students to actually go into the same assembly as their able-bodied counterparts. This is a school building program that contributed to its educational performance.
Okay, look, I know that you could both argue about the school building program for the rest of the day if we had time, but we unfortunately don't. There is a lot of water to go under the bridge for this shake-up of the school funding system. As I said, the review isn't due to report till the end of the year, so all of this is speculation at this stage, of course. I do need to get to another issue, though. That is Chris Bowen's announcement yesterday about the treatment the government will have of those who are found to have criminal convictions if they play up in detention centres like we've seen at the Villawood Detention Centre in recent days. As a result, Chris Bowen says that anyone with a criminal conviction, an asylum seeker who is a genuine refugee, will go on a temporary visa. Labor's railed against temporary visas for years, saying they're unfair, ineffective, bad for people's mental state. Why are you now backflipping and saying that you'll introduce them?
Actually, I have to disagree with your characterisation of what Minister Bowen announced yesterday. Minister Bowen announced that if you're convicted of a crime while in immigration detention, then the assumption will be that you don't get a permanent visa. He then said that there will be certain conditions in which someone might be sent back to face persecution. We would not do that. That's not the Australian way. So we may in those instances look to use one of the temporary visas which continue to exist in the Migration Act, such as the Safe Haven temporary visa. We are not reinstating temporary protection visas. Temporary protection visas automatically...
Some of these asylum seekers who are genuine refugees are going to be put on temporary visas under your government.
Well, certainly what this is trying to do is to send a clear message that violence in our detention centres is unacceptable. Labor believes that that is the right approach to protect detainees, the staff who work in detention centres, and the reputation of the many genuine refugees in these centres. We're taking a humane approach to refugees consistent with international obligations and very different from that imposed under the Coalition.
Mitch Fifield, why aren't we seeing the Coalition being more support of this return to temporary visas, at least for a portion of asylum seekers who may be found to participate in criminal activities while they're in detention centres? You've been arguing for tougher penalties for some time.
Well, we'll take a look at Labor's legislation when they bring it forward, but this is a pretty weak and half-hearted response to a problem which is entirely of Labor's creation. What Chris Bowen's proposing isn't going to stop the boats, it's not going to stop the protests, it's not going to stop the damage, and I doubt that it's going to strike fear into the hearts of those who are currently sitting on the roof at Villawood. This government has completely lost control, not just of our borders, not just of our immigration intake, but they've also lost control of the detention facilities. Andrew, there are currently about 7,000 people in detention in Australia. When the Howard government left office, there were barely 100 people. What changed? Well, this government abolished temporary protection visas. This government abolished offshore processing. It is as a direct result of the policies of this government that the people smugglers now have a good product to sell. They've been selling it, and the result is we have 7,000 people in detention. That's why we're having these riots. That's why we're having these fires. That's why we're having this damage. The solution is to reintroduce temporary protection visas and to reintroduce offshore processing. Take away the product so the people smugglers can't sell it. Until the government does this, they're really just words that mean nothing. This government isn't serious.
Look, plenty of more debate that we could have on this issue again, but we are out of time. We need to get to the next news bulletin. Mitch Fifield, Andrew Lee, thank you both for joining us this morning. We will continue these discussions this afternoon on Lunchtime Agenda at 1:30. Among our guests,